Welcome back to the Deep Dive Learner. Have you ever, craved something so intensely that it literally felt like it was completely taking over your mind?
Oh, and we are not talking about a passing thought or, a mild preference here.
No, no, we are talking about a physical ache, a hunger that starts to just completely warp the very way you perceive the world around you.
Right, until that one specific craving is literally the only thing that makes any logical sense anymore.
Exactly.
Because that kind of craving introduces a terrifying loss of control.
Mm.
I mean, it is the exact moment your own desires become entirely unrecognizable to you.
Yeah, you basically become a passenger in your own body.
Precisely.
And that profound loss of control is the foundation of our mission today. So we are taking a deep dive into the psychological horror and the incredibly rich cultural metaphors embedded in Monica Kim's novel, The Eyes Are the Best Part.
It's such a complex book.
It really is.
Right.
And just to be clear to you listening, while we are analyzing a work of fiction today, this book serves as an absolute masterclass in using the horror genre to dissect very grounded, very real-world themes.
Yeah, we're talking about the mechanics of generational trauma, the systemic fetishization of Asian women, and, the really harsh realities of the immigrant experience.
Right. Because the horror genre has always been a reliable mirror for societal anxieties.
But this narrative functions more like a magnifying glass, I'd say. It takes the everyday subtle horrors of systemic objectification and magnifies them until they literally burst into visual violence.
Which is a great point to bring up the content notice. Before we step into that world, I do need to impartially relay the book's content warnings to you, as provided by the publisher.
Good call.
So this deep dive will discuss depictions of violence, body horror, murder, cannibalism, stalking, sexism, and racism, specifically focusing on anti-Asian objectification.
Yeah, it gets intense. And to understand the pressure cooker of this story, we first really need to look at the physical and emotional space these characters occupy.
Right, the apartment.
Exactly. We're placed inside this cramped, 700-square-foot apartment shared by a Korean-American family.
And our narrator is 18-year-old Ji-won.
Right. She lives with their 15-year-old sister, Ji-hyun, and their mother, who they simply call Uma.
And the inciting incident that just shatters this family's fragile ecosystem happens on a really humid night in July.
Just after Independence Day, right?
Yeah, exactly. The fireworks are still echoing outside, and the father, abruptly, almost clinically, announces that he is leaving Uma for another woman.
And he just walks out the door.
He really does. And that abandonment doesn't just create an empty room. I mean, it creates this psychological vacuum that completely warps how the family functions.
Oh, absolutely. We immediately see this massive shift from him walking out to how the family physically attempts to cope with this sudden gaping void.
And Uma's reaction is particularly jarring because she doesn't withdraw or shut down.
No, she overcompensates in a way that feels, honestly, almost manic.
Yeah. A few days after he leaves, she comes home and cooks this massive, lavish feast. I mean, way more than they can afford.
Oh, the spread is unbelievable. She prepares a big stone pot of braised beef short ribs, wilted spinach drenched in sesame oil, garlicky fiddleheads, soybean sprouts, fresh kimchi.
And the centerpiece.
Right, the absolute centerpiece, a whole deep-fried fish.
And the table is literally groaning under the weight of all this food, and she deliberately sets an extra place for the husband who is clearly never coming back.
The psychology of that feast is just fascinating to me. Because when faced with an overwhelming emotional deficit, Uma attempts to manufacture physical abundance.
Yeah, but the true focal point of this dinner isn't just the food, it's the ritual she initiates.
Oh, the fisheye.
Yes. Uma expertly dissects that deep-fried fish with her metal chopsticks, and she is completely unfazed by the burning heat of the flesh.
She just pulls out the spine, picks the meat clean, and then she deliberately plucks the fish's eyeball out of its socket.
And she pops the entire eye into her mouth.
Chews it up with the skin crackling between her teeth.
It's so visceral. And she cheerfully announces to her daughters that eating fish eyes brings good luck.
Because she's operating under this superstitious, really desperate hope that consuming this eye will somehow magically draw her husband back home.
Right, and her daughters are forced to sit there and just watch this. I mean, Ji-hyun, the younger sister, is a famously picky eater. She gags at something as simple as the texture of tomatoes.
So watching her mother chew an eyeball makes her turn pale and sweat profusely.
But Uma is just smiling, showing off her silver fillings, completely oblivious to the absolute disgust radiating from her kids.
Well, to really grasp the weight of that scene, we have to pull back a bit. We have to look at the underlying architecture of Uma's mind.
Which was built during her tragic childhood in 1970s Seoul.
Exactly. This desperate reliance on superstition and survival isn't just a random quirk.
No, she grew up in a village crippled by extreme poverty. The threat of actual starvation was a daily reality for her.
Her parents abandoned the family to find work and just vanished. And her older siblings eventually realized they had to leave too, so they trekked through brutal winter snow to find employment in the city.
And her older brother actually dragged her by the hair, trying to force her to come with them, but she refused to leave the only home she knew.
So she survived that brutal winter entirely isolated.
Yeah, she kept herself alive by eating tree bark, eating snow, and catching rats.
It's horrifying. When we introduce the concept of generational trauma, it can sometimes sound like an abstract academic buzzword,
Right.
But in Uma's case, it is deeply literal. The physiological trauma of starving in the freezing cold permanently rewired her nervous system to operate from a place of intense scarcity.
And that historical starvation maps perfectly onto her current behavior. The physical starvation of her childhood has basically mutated into the emotional starvation of her adulthood.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
When her husband leaves, her nervous system recognizes that familiar threat of abandonment and just kicks into high gear.
So, cooking a feast she can't afford and eating a fisheye for luck, these are desperate attempts to reclaim agency.
She is trying to control a life narrative that has been entirely defined by waiting for people who abandon her.
And we see that inherited nervous system response manifesting physically in the younger sister Ji-hyun as well.
Oh, the ankle scratching.
Yeah. Whenever Ji-hyun feels the ambient anxiety in the apartment rising, she nervously scratches her ankle raw until it oozes clear liquid and bleeds.
It's a stress-induced coping mechanism she's had since she was a 2-year-old. Her body is physically keeping the score of the family's instability.
But looking at the fisheye ritual, I see it as a twisted emotional talisman.
How so?
Well, if Uma is willing to swallow her own disgust and eat this eye to survive the emotional starvation of her husband leaving, we have to ask what this is actually teaching our narrator, Ji-won.
Oh, that's a good point.
She isn't just learning resilience. She is absorbing the dangerous lesson that in order to survive, you must willingly consume the very things that repulse you.
Wow, yeah. That specific lesson absolutely lays the psychological groundwork for everything that follows.
Right.
Because G1 internalizes the idea that desperate consumption is a valid, perhaps even necessary response to trauma.
And because the family is projecting this aura of vulnerability and desperation, they inadvertently send up a flare for predators.
The nature abhors a vacuum.
It really does. Uma is desperate for a savior to step into the space her husband vacated, and the narrative introduces a man who smells that exact vulnerability and weaponizes it.
Enter George.
Enter George. So George is a white IT consultant from New York whom Uma happens to meet at the local Korean market.
And he has these piercing, bright blue eyes that the text describes as Niagara Falls blue.
Yeah, he speaks a little bit of Korean from a military stint in Seoul, and he presents himself as someone who deeply appreciates Asian culture.
And Uma immediately elevates him to the status of a white knight. She thinks he's going to rescue her from poverty and loneliness.
But the danger of George lies in how he masks his predatory nature under the guise of cultural appreciation.
Right. We frequently hear the term the white gaze used in cultural criticism.
Yes, which refers to the assumption that the default perspective is white and that other cultures exist primarily to be observed, judged, or consumed by that dominant perspective.
And George is the physical embodiment of this concept. His quote-unquote appreciation is actually just fetishization.
He doesn't see Uma or her daughters as complex human beings at all.
He views them as flat, obedient stereotypes that exist entirely for his pleasure and comfort.
And we see the reality of that gaze through relentless microaggressions. He moves in for their tiny apartment and instantly dominates the physical space.
Leaves his crusty, unwashed dishes in the sink.
Drinks the last of their milk without replacing it.
Walks around their shared living space in just a towel.
And he makes these offhand comments about Asian women being naturally subservient.
Plus, later on, Ji-won discovers his secret stash of Asian pornography hidden under their couch.
He even has the audacity to call the 15-year-old sister Ji-hyun a slut. He treats their home like a personal playground where he sets the rules.
He uses his proximity to their culture not to connect with them, but to assert dominance over them.
Yeah, and this dynamic crystallizes in a deeply uncomfortable dinner scene that echoes Uma's earlier fish ritual.
Oh, that scene is rough.
George aggressively knocks Ji-won's chopsticks off the table, physically preventing her from participating in the shared meal.
And then he reaches into the serving dish, digs a fish eyeball out of its socket, and drops it into his own mouth.
He sucks the meat right off it, and the text really emphasizes the wet, squelching sound of his chewing.
But he doesn't just eat it, he weaponizes it.
Right. After he sucks the meat off, he pulls the eyeball out of his mouth, completely slick with his own saliva, and dangles it right in front of Ji-won's face, taunting her with it.
It is an overwhelming display of dominance.
I look at George as an invasive species entering a weakened, fragile ecosystem. He's not a savior. He's a parasite wearing a socially acceptable good guy mask.
Yeah.
And to you listening, it forces a really uncomfortable reflection on how often so-called cultural appreciation is utilized as a shield for fetishization and consumption.
It's a brilliant metaphor. And the author also contrasts George with another character to prove that this predatory behavior isn't limited to overt aggressors.
Oh, Jeffrey.
Yes, Ji-won's classmate, Jeffrey. He is the quintessential performative male feminist.
He deliberately carries around a Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie book just so people will notice it.
And he wears a "Nevertheless She Persisted" t-shirt. He presents himself as the ultimate safe ally.
Yet later in the story, he stalks Ji-won. He follows her around without her consent and aggressively demands her affection because he feels his performative allyship entitles him to her body.
Both George and Jeffrey are utilizing different masks. One plays the worldly savior, the other plays the progressive ally.
But they are driving toward the exact same goal, possession and control.
Exactly.
But, when a parasite invades a host body, the body eventually mounts an immune response.
Right.
Because George is metaphorically consuming her family and her culture, Ji-won's subconscious mind begins searching for a way to fight back.
And it lands on a horrific solution. She decides to reverse the consumption.
And the psychological horror truly awakens here.
It does, but the author introduces a vital piece of context before the violence begins. We learn that Ji-won is not a perfectly innocent victim, corrupted solely by George's arrival.
No, she has a documented history of severe, pre-existing sociopathic tendencies.
Yeah, there's this revealing flashback to her high school years, just before her tight-knit friend group is scheduled to leave for different colleges.
The group makes these earnest promises to stay together, but Ji-won is convinced she will be the one left behind and forgotten.
So to preemptively protect herself, she deliberately steals her best friend Han Byul's prized heirloom ring.
A precious piece of jewelry passed down from a grandmother.
And she plants it in another friend's desk to frame her for the theft. Ji-won intentionally detonates their friendship so she can control the terms of their abandonment.
That incident really complicates the entire narrative for me. It tells us the darkness was already lying dormant inside her, just waiting for the right conditions to bloom.
And George's constant invasive gaze acts as the perfect fertilizer for that dormant seed.
Definitely. Ji-won starts suffering from intensely claustrophobic nightmares. She dreams she's trapped in a tiny, suffocating room where the walls are entirely coated in eyes.
Glassy fish eyes, deer eyes, rabbit eyes.
All staring unblinkingly at her, raining down upon her, and this paranoia morphs into a hyperfixation.
She literally sits at her computer and Googles, "How firm are blue eyes?"
She develops a visceral, nauseating disgust for brown eyes, comparing them to mud and physical decay.
While simultaneously cultivating an intense, mouth-watering craving for blue eyes.
The selection of the eye as the object of her craving is such a brilliant literary device.
Because the eye is the literal biological mechanism of the gaze that oppresses her.
Exactly. And this obsession pushes her past the point of no return. While walking home at night, Ji-won encounters a homeless man in a dark alley.
And the crucial detail here is that he happens to have bright blue eyes.
Driven by a hunger she can no longer suppress or rationalize, she brutally murders him with a knife.
The sensory details Monika Kim employs in this sequence are designed to lodge in your memory.
Ji-won doesn't just kill the man to eliminate him, she harvests the organ.
She uses the blade to slice through the eyelid, digs her bare fingers deep into the socket.
And the text describes the wet, audible snap of the optic nerve as she pulls it free.
She takes the eye to a dingy gas station bathroom, washes it in the sink, and then shoves the cold eyeball directly into her mouth.
The description focuses on the hard crunch of the cartilage against her teeth, followed by a salty, lemony, tomato-like burst of jelly flooding her mouth.
It is deeply disturbing. But analytically, it is a masterstroke of flipping the script on objectification.
How do you mean?
Well, throughout her entire life, men like George have reduced Asian women to a single, fetishized trait entirely ignoring their humanity.
Right.
So Ji-won responds to this systemic trauma by utilizing the exact same tactic. She reduces these men to a single physical trait, their blue eyes.
Wow.
By turning the ultimate symbol of their privilege and their invasive gaze into literal sustenance, she objectifies them. She strips them of their power and consumes it.
She is attempting to eat the very gaze that is oppressing her. She takes her profound trauma and weaponizes it, transforming her powerlessness into this horrific, monstrous empowerment.
Yeah.
But this brings me back to the heirloom ring. Given how calculated and destructive she was with her high school friends, we have to push back on the idea that she is purely a victim of circumstance.
That's the big question.
Is George actually the catalyst for her violent psychological break? Or did his abhorrent behavior merely provide a convenient, socially resonant excuse for a violent compulsion that she was always going to act upon eventually?
The author refuses to hand the reader a clean answer, and that is where the tension thrives.
Right.
Are we watching a righteous avenger dismantling systemic oppression? Or are we watching a clinical psychopath using her genuine cultural trauma as a convenient alibi to justify her violent urges?
And just as the reader settles into the psychological debate, the narrative introduces a massive twist that forces us to completely reevaluate the source of the horror.
Yeah. As Ji-won's hallucinations reach a fever pitch, she's seeing giant, disembodied eyeballs resting in her bed. She's paranoid that her beautiful classmate Alexis is secretly plotting to betray her, and the boundary between nightmare and reality completely dissolves. She suddenly collapses.
She wakes up in a sterile hospital room, and the doctors deliver a shocking, purely physical explanation for her mental deterioration.
The medical staff informs her that she has a brain tumor.
A brain tumor.
Yes. Furthermore, they note that based on its size and placement, it is highly probable she has had this tumor her entire life. This mass of tissue has been sitting inside her skull, slowly growing, pressing against the delicate structures of her brain, and fundamentally warping her perception of reality from the very beginning.
Which introduces an entirely new layer of complexity to our deep dive. The presence of a brain tumor forces us to ask, does a physiological anomaly absolve her of the moral responsibility for murder and cannibalism?
It's a huge shift.
I see the brain tumor as a literal physical manifestation of generational trauma going on the offensive.
Interesting.
Earlier, we unpacked how Ji-hyun nervously scratches her ankle until it bleeds because the nervous system remembers trauma. The body keeps the score.
Right.
But in Ji-won's case, the body isn't just keeping the score anymore. The trauma has calcified into a tumor, and the body has decided to actively attack the threats around it.
The brilliance of the tumor twist lies in how it creates tension between the medical reality and the metaphorical meaning. You have a tangible physiological reason for her violent hallucinations and her complete lack of impulse control. But the specific manifestation of that madness is not random.
Right. The tumor didn't make her obsessed with elbows or ears.
Exactly. It made her obsessed with blue eyes.
Yeah.
The madness was shaped and directed by her lived reality as an Asian American woman enduring the suffocating weight of George's fetishizing gaze.
And the most terrifying part is that cutting out the physical tumor does not cure the psychological rot.
No, it doesn't.
Even after she undergoes brain surgery to remove the mass, the violence escalates. In the gruesome finale, Ji-won is supposed to be recovering in her hospital bed.
And George happens to be sleeping in the connected hospital room, knocked out on an Ambien.
So Ji-won sneaks out of her bed and enters his room. She takes a knife, carefully wrapping the handle in a dinner napkin so she doesn't leave any fingerprints.
Proving she still possesses cold, calculated logic.
Exactly. She slices his eyelids off, saws through the optic nerves, and meticulously cuts out his Niagara Falls blue eyes.
And she carries them back to her room and hides the bleeding eyeballs right inside her hospital-issued dinner tray of chicken and rice.
The final image is those bright blue irises staring up at her from among the grains of rice.
To fully synthesize why this ending lands with such impact, it is incredibly helpful to look at the author's note tucked into the acknowledgments.
What does she say?
Monika Kim briefly discusses her own mother, who immigrated from Seoul to Los Angeles in 1985. In doing so, Kim introduces the traditional Korean concept of polja, which loosely translates to destiny or fate.
The implication being that certain paths, certain tragedies, might just be written into our bloodline, unavoidable no matter how hard we try to assimilate or escape.
Yes, and the genius of the eyes are the best part lies in its refusal to resolve its own ambiguity.
Right.
Whether Ji-won's horrific actions are driven by the pressure of a medical anomaly, the fracture of a pre-existing sociopathic mind, or the inescapable gravity of a generational curse, the ultimate result is the same.
The novel perfectly externalizes the internal decay caused by systemic sexism, racism, and grinding poverty.
The external monster, the man who fetishizes and consumes a vulnerable family, ultimately engineers the creation of an internal monster that rises up to consume him.
We have traced an incredibly dark, complex through line today. We started with a mother's desperate, superstitious survival tactic, eating a fried fisheye just to feel a sense of hope.
And we followed that thread all the way to a daughter's horrific, literal consumption of her oppressors.
We've examined how emotional starvation practically invites predators into our lives and how the simple act of observing someone can be mutated into a profound act of violence.
It fundamentally challenges us to recognize that trauma does not merely happen to us. It fundamentally reshapes the architecture of how we interact with the world.
Yeah.
It forces us to scrutinize the mechanics of power in our own environments.
Which is exactly why we do these deep dives, learner. I want you to take these extreme metaphors and reflect on the nature of consumption in your own daily life.
Think about the subtle dynamics in your workplace or your community.
How often do we look at others merely as flat objects designed to satisfy our own narratives or needs, much like George did? How often do we dress up our desire to control or possess something by calling it appreciation or allyship?
And perhaps more uncomfortably, we must ask ourselves, what are the indignities or microaggressions we are forcing ourselves to silently swallow just to maintain the peace in a room we don't feel we own?
I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over today as you step back into the real world. If the eyes are truly the window to the soul, what actually happens to you when you devour them? Does consuming the monster that oppresses you finally grant you freedom, or does it simply guarantee that you mutate into the new monster of the story? Think about the toxic things you might be metaphorically swallowing every single day just to survive. Until next time.